Ronna Wineberg is the author of the new story collection, 9 Facts That Can Change Your Life, as well as On Bittersweet Place, her first novel. 9 Facts explores our essential bonds to partners, children, parents, and friends, intimacy, marriage, parenthood, adultery, divorce, and the legacies left by the past unfold in these beautifully written stories. On Bittersweet Place is a coming-of-age account of Lina Chernitsky, a young Russian Jew whose family fled Ukraine after the October Revolution, finally resettling in Chicago, where sad events keep undermining their quest for normalcy. What sets this novel apart from others is Lina's incredibly endearing voice, as well as the challenges she and her family face that really are universal to all immigrant families. Ronna and her work have received many awards and have appeared in many publications. She's received a fellowship in fiction from the New York Foundation for the Arts and is the founding fiction editor of the Bellevue Literary Review. Ronna Wineberg is my guest today. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. Welcome back. Ronna, thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I enjoyed your books tremendously. Let's talk about On Bittersweet Place first. It's an immigrant story about a young girl, and as I've said in my opening, it's not a new tale. We've read other things, but this was particularly compelling. What inspired you to write this story?
I was really inspired by my family. My mother's family came from Russia, and they did flee. And I heard a lot of stories about Russia when I was growing up. And because of that, I was inspired to write the story. I thought it would be interesting to write an immigrant story that wasn't set in New York, but was set in the Midwest, in Chicago, that it would be a new setting and an interesting place to set immigrants.
Did you have to do much research? Because you're in New York, and I assume your family came to New York.
No, actually, my family came to Chicago.
Oh, they did?
Yes, and I'm from Chicago. I knew the city, but I had to do a lot of research because I didn't really know much about Chicago in the 1920s or the world in the 1920s, and also what was happening in Russia in the teens. So I did a lot of research about daily life and books and literature and schools and that sort of thing, history.
Do you think that there are some universal issues that affect immigrants today who are not from Eastern Europe? And we have immigrants in our country from the Far East, from the Middle East, from South American countries. Is there a universal factor that links all immigrants?
I think there are universal factors. Of course, today immigration is a little more complicated because of the changes that are taking place. But I think all immigrants, struggle coming to a new country. They have to learn a new language. They have to find work. They struggle to assimilate, but they may not have the skills necessary for the new culture. So I think that's something that connects immigrants from the 1920s to today's immigrants.
I think there was another feature in the book that probably is universal too, and that's the discrimination against immigrants. I mean, in the story, Lina is a very compelling young girl. I think we start out, she must be about 10 or 12.
Right, she's 10 when she comes to the country.
And she's having difficulty with a school teacher.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Why is that teacher refusing to accept her work? She's trying to submit, I think it was sketches that she had done.
Yes. Well, in this case, in the book, the teacher turns out to have a lot of prejudices against Jews and immigrants because of something in her past. But I think sometimes people are just prejudiced against immigrants because they're different. They're outsiders. They're not familiar. And the prejudice existed then and it exists now.
But in this case, the teacher, it took a lot of involvement on the parents' part before anybody smoked out what the teacher was, she was just being mean to this little girl.
Yes.
And then she basically admitted that you couldn't be accurate or you couldn't be honest because you're an immigrant. Now, Lina calls upon her father to be involved.
Yes.
And he's reluctant to do so.
Yes, because he's come from Russia and he's had experience dealing with authorities there, and he doesn't want to create more problems. So that's his vantage point. And also, he doesn't really understand the schools and bureaucracy because he wasn't raised here and it's still unfamiliar to him. So that's his hesitation.
Okay. But it seemed that there was something more compelling. He says something along the lines of, I'm trying to be less important in your life.
Yes, yes, he says that. That's his way of telling Lina that he wants her to stand on her own, to become independent, to grow up. He wants to become less important so that she can take better care of herself. She can learn how to navigate the world.
Okay. Do you think that's an immigrant attitude, or is that more universal?
I think it could be universal. I think at certain points parents need to step back from their children and they can't always help them out as the child would want. And of course it's a personal choice from the parent's perspective as to when to do that.
Now, her mother was a very different sort of person.
Yes.
And she seemed more, I think, compromised by the immigrant experience. She seemed more burdened.
Yes, yes.
Than the father, who certainly had his travails, but he had a business and he worked. And,
yes.
And she seemed to shoulder all of the personal responsibilities and difficulties in the family.
Yes, that's true.
And she also seemed kind of removed from her daughter.
Yes. I think, in this case, and I think perhaps in many immigrant families, the parents are really struggling to survive and they're struggling to make their way in the new world. And there may not be a lot of energy left or attention left to really help children in the way children need to be helped.
So how does that impact the child growing up? Do you, in your research, did you notice a difference between immigrant young people, adolescents, and those who were born here? Is there something that makes them different because of how they're treated by their parents or by the world that they live in?
I think that they are different. I think in some cases, immigrant children can really strive even harder than children born here because they so want to assimilate and they so want to belong. In other cases, they may be kind of crushed by their circumstances and almost neglected, and so they might not struggle as hard.
I remember a former guest of mine who was a journalist, a well-known journalist, and he wrote a memoir, and he talked about as 5 or 6 years old, he was called upon to interpret for his parents because he spoke English.
Yes.
Children, I guess, pick up a language pretty rapidly, and the parents never really acquired good English. And he would be negotiating things like the phone bill or whatever the utility bill is, and it empowered him. I mean, it changed the balance of power in the family, which skews things a little bit. So it undermines the parents' authority, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's true. In fact, in the book, Lina has to help her mother when the mother receives a letter from a hospital.
Right.
The mother asks Lina to call the hospital and find out what's going on. It involves another family member. And so, in a way, Lina becomes the adult because the mother is not capable, just like your friend had to do for his parents.
Right. I mean, it's legitimate, but it just does change that balance. I mean, the parents are supposed to be the grown-ups.
Yes.
Right? And they're supposed to be in control, and yet they're overwhelmed or compromised in this situation. Now, Lina's family was particularly challenged. She had 2 uncles who were pretty difficult.
Yes, that's true.
And I think there are many families, whether they be immigrant or not, that have to deal with that. I mean, one uncle with some real emotional difficulties.
Yes, that's true. And I think in this case, the family felt very bonded and very close to each other, to one another. So they were protective of the uncles, even when perhaps they shouldn't be or they should have gotten help for them.
Right. Well, there was one uncle who was a predator.
Right, right.
And again, that's a story that really rang true, but it's probably not an immigrant story. I mean, there are predators in a lot of families, and everybody wants to deny that that exists.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think especially in the 1920s, those things just weren't talked about. Now we read about them and it's just much more visible, but then those things were kept hidden. There was some shame connected with it.
Yes. Now, the family also did something very interesting. The father formed a club.
Yes.
Which I found actually delightful. I mean, it was just a way of creating a social network.
Yes.
And I wonder, is that a normal immigrant experience? I mean, he created a club that met in his house, and I guess they played cards and had drinks and snacks or whatever.
Right. I don't know if it's a normal experience. I know in my mother's family, we did have a family club, but basically what we did is we would go and have a picnic by the lake or something like that. It wasn't as formalized as this. But I think, especially with immigrant families who are such outsiders in the wider world, that they may cling together and socialize together and form rituals that allow them to do that.
It seemed like it was a way of not having to deal with the outside world.
Yes.
So they could keep themselves close. And yet in many things I've read about immigrants, one of the things that causes people in a community to resent about them is their refusal to assimilate.
Yes.
I mean, you can't have it both ways. People want them to assimilate and they want them to not assimilate. Stay to yourself, but be like us.
Right. That's correct. And I think for immigrants, you know, assimilation is this huge sort of mountain to climb because everything is so new. So how do you really become part of the larger culture? It takes a long, long time.
Now, you said your family were immigrants in
yes,
the 20s.
my grandparents.
Grandparents. So did they talk about their experience?
Well, especially on my mother's side, they did flee from Russia, and I had a lot of great aunts and uncles and grandparents, and two of my aunts and uncles also came from Russia. And they would talk about their experiences sometimes if we asked them questions. And when I was in college, some cousins of mine and I decided to ask these relatives questions about their life in Russia. And it was very interesting, and actually the stories were riveting, and that probably was what really inspired me to write the novel.
Did you record those stories or write them
Yes,
down?
we recorded the stories.
Oh, how smart of you.
Yeah.
To do that. Because a lot of people say that their families didn't talk.
Right, right. And they didn't really talk that much about what happened once they came here. But it was interesting because they argued about things that happened while they were in Russia, you know, arguing about the facts and sort of the sequence of events. I mean, in a playful way, everyone had a different memory. But I think when you leave your home country, it's very painful. And so that's another reason people stay bonded, is because it helps them preserve the memories in that old life.
Now, you talk about resilience, or at least I implied the resilience in the people who could stay here. Part of the family did not stay.
Right, that's correct.
They could not adjust.
They couldn't adjust. They decided to go to Poland, where where the aunt's relatives lived, because they felt they could live a more religious life and it would be a life that was more comfortable for them.
I found myself saying, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we have the benefit of knowing what's to
come. Exactly. And actually, that's what happened to them. They were part of the Holocaust. I know what happened to different people, even though I didn't put it in the book.
Okay, so this is based on some of the real stories.
Well, actually, the Russian portions of the book are loosely based on my mother's family.
Okay.
But the other portions of the book I just made up.
Okay.
So, because I didn't really know what happened to them in the 1920s. But I was so struck by the stories of fleeing and persecution and fear that's what caused me to write the book.
Now, are there any family members still around who survived the immigration?
Not really. There was one who didn't quite survive, but when the book was published, one of them was still alive.
Did that person get to read the book?
Yes, he read the book.
Okay, and what was his reaction to it?
He thought it was interesting. He thought, was that our family? I said no.
But he didn't say you didn't get that right, or you should have included.
No, but I did have an experience with my mother, who of course didn't immigrate here, but her parents did. I read the prologue to her.
Okay.
She was still alive then, but she wasn't alive when I published the book. And she said to me, but that's not the way it happened. And I said, Mom, that's okay. It's fiction. It's a novel.
Okay.
Because I changed the facts of it.
And did she accept that?
She did. She did.
Okay. Did she feel that you got it right in the sense of what these people experienced?
Well, she didn't really read the rest of the book, but I think she felt I captured the fear.
Okay. There's another theme that really is not an immigrant theme that I thought is worth exploring, and that's, a time-tested theme of illusion versus reality. Lina develops a friendship with a young boy who seems like a very nice young boy. I mean, there's nothing predatory about this at all. Just a first love, I guess. And his family appears to have it all.
Yes.
But they don't.
That's correct. That's correct. So you're right, it's about appearances. You know, to her, they live a golden life, they live in a large house, they have beautiful things, but there are problems in their family.
Right.
And problems in the business.
Yes, and that Lina's family is much more modest means.
Yes.
And could easily be intimidated by them. But it seems like she realizes that things are not always what they seem.
Yes, she does. I think that's a good learning experience for her, too, to idealize that family. And in fact, her boyfriend, Max, says that she doesn't really know what goes on in his family. Right. So he tries to bring her back to reality.
Well, it's a very touching story.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit more about 9 facts that can change your life. What are the 9 facts that can change my life?
Well,
this is a series of short stories.
Yes, it is. Well, I think the point is we would all love 9 facts to change our life, and there are no 9 facts that will change our life. But I titled the book that because it's the title of one of the stories, and I felt many of the people are struggling with their lives in the book and would like 9 facts. So it's kind of an ironic title.
Okay, because I came away with it, and it was so many topics that you deal with, mostly about relationships.
Yes.
And relationships that are ending.
Yes.
And how to move on from that.
Yes.
But I didn't quite come away with 9 facts.
Right.
I couldn't quite tick them all off.
Right.
But one of the subjects that came up a lot is ritual.
Yes.
How important is ritual in your life, in anybody's life? You talk about a Shiva, a mourning period, and I think one of the characters in one of the stories I liked a lot said she wishes there was a Shiva for a relationship. In other words, a mourning period for a relationship, just as there is when somebody really dies.
Right. Well, I think, the ritual for when someone dies is very comforting. So when a relationship ends, there's no ritual really that's equivalent, but it would be very helpful to have a ritual because I think it gives closure. So I think rituals give structure to life, especially to the chaotic elements of life, and they may help people come to terms with what's happening and make peace with it.
Can ritual also be a destructive force?
I suppose if it's too structured, it can be.
Well, or a matter of dispute between partners in a relationship.
Yes, that's true.
It just seemed to me that it brought some people comfort, but some other people resentment.
That's true. I think that's true.
In what ways did you find that divorce and death are similar?
Well, I think death, of course, is final and the person is absent. You never see the person again.
Right.
In divorce, the relationship has a finality. It's over, although you may see the person again, but it's really the death of an entity, a unit, what the 2 people were, maybe even a family as it was. So I think in that way it's similar. It's the death of something.
Because I think that was a theme that came through many of the stories.
Yes.
And it seemed, you were so related to this. Maybe many friends who've gone through this or personal experience?
Yes, both. And just, seeing what happens in the world. There's so much of it.
Right. Well, you also, you deal with so many subjects that were very thoughtful. Is history destiny? If your family lived one way, are you destined to have to live the same way or repeat their experiences? I felt there was one character, Denise, for example. I think she married somebody who had left his first wife or lover.
Yes, that's right.
That was it.
That's right.
And then, of course, he left her at a later point. Should she have known?
I don't know. That was a question. If someone has a history of something or a history in their family or has already left someone, does that mean that that's the person's proclivity? I don't have an answer to that, but that was a question I was looking at.
Okay, because I felt that you did a good job at not being judgmental, but posing questions.
Yes.
That were
Thank you.
Provocative.
Thank you. I wish I had answers, but I had a lot of questions.
Well, I told you I wanted those 9 facts.
I know. Well, one of the facts was, is adversity ever useful? Which is really an idea, but that was a
well,
fact.
you talked about striving before.
Yes.
And how people who are striving are usually facing some form of adversity.
Yes.
And it makes you stronger, or proves you can survive it, get
Yeah.
through a difficult time. I often wonder about that. You know, I mean, you think about kids, I've grown kids, but when they're given everything, I mean, are the ones who sailed through school and life better off than the ones who struggled? And I don't know. I mean, the jury's out. Everybody's, you know, a human being relates to things differently.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think sometimes people who struggle develop that resilience that you mentioned. And when things come easily for someone, the person doesn't develop the same resilience.
Right.
And of course, at every point in life, people face trials.
Mm-hmm. But two people in the same situation can experience something very different.
Yes.
I mean, at one point, I think one of your stories that being married was like being in a foreign country.
Right.
I mean, it's not a new theme, but it was posed very intricately. I mean, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. But can we be in the same room and experience something totally different?
I think we can. You know, because you can really, you really don't know what's in another person's mind.
No.
And people can camouflage. You know, people don't always convey their emotions, not camouflaging it in a you know, negative way, but just, you know, people don't always convey what they're feeling.
Right. But even more than that, conveying what they're feeling, can people be manipulative in ways that they don't necessarily actively intend? And I think about one of the stories where you deal with a husband who has left, but really hasn't severed the relationship. He keeps calling every week or sending flowers. I can't remember exactly the details. But that push-pull disables the left partner from moving on.
Yes, I think that's true. I think when a relationship is dissolved, even if someone may want it to end, there's still attachment.
Right.
And so it can be hard to sever that attachment. So in that case, the husband might not have been manipulating purposefully, but maybe as a result of his attachment that still remained.
Okay, so you didn't imbue an intent to undermine his former spouse. You just saw it that he was just keeping the contact alive because it worked for him.
Right, because it worked for him, I think, and I also felt he was thinking more of himself than of the partner.
Right.
But for whatever the reason, he wasn't able at that point to sever the bonds.
But it did have a negative impact on the other spouse.
It did.
Now, I don't remember, she didn't kind of stand up to him and say, it's over, we've got to just move on.
No, she didn't. But at the end, I think it's the same story. At the end, he calls her and she doesn't pick up the phone.
Well, that's a pretty strong
Yes,
statement.
but it took her a while to get there.
I guess, I mean, it has to be very difficult to be the bereft partner, someone who is left. And I guess it's like having a lifeline, you know, you until you realize that it's really not preventing you from drowning, it's preventing you from swimming.
Yes. Actually, that's a great analogy, a great metaphor.
Well, we'll have to see if we can work on that.
Yes.
You also talked about letters. I thought that was very interesting. I have an old college friend who I communicate with now on email, but we write letters on email as opposed to, you know, the quick what's happening or whatever. And we used to do that. We went through college together, and we used to write letters in our early years of marriage, and I wished I'd kept them because as we examined our new lives and jobs and careers and kids and all of that. But you talked about the role of letters being one in someone's head, I mean, and then it's perceived by someone.
Yes.
Explore that a little bit.
Well, I think the character said that every letter has two lives, just like you said, one what the letter writer intends, and one what the reader, who the recipient sees in the letter. You know, I guess the same thing is true for writing too. A writer always intends something, maybe is unburdening, you know, in terms of a letter, is unburdening herself or himself. And you don't know how the reader will interpret that. So in that sense, when you let go of a letter, when you let go of a book, it goes into the world, it goes to the recipient, and the recipient interprets it as he or she sees fit and as fits in his or her experience too.
So someone, I mean, I remember as an adolescent being told, well, if you want to work through a problem, just write it. You know, write a letter that nobody will ever read. So you can have different intents as a writer. I mean, on one hand, you could be writing and expect a response to what you've said, or you could be just egocentric about it and just be working it out in your own head.
Ventilating.
Ventilating.
Right. But I mean, I think in the sense of a letter, one, you know, if I were writing a letter, I would write it with the person in mind, just as you're writing it to your college friend. So you might tell her things that would be relevant to her because of your relationship. So that would be the optimal way to write letters.
But it's knowing what the person's intent is, because if you expect a response and you don't get it, then you feel rebuffed.
Yes.
If you're just venting and you don't really care if it's ever responded to, well, then so be it.
Yes. But then if you're just venting, there's no chance for communication.
Right. Yes, so a letter can be a communication device, or it can just be a very egocentric device for posing whatever it is you want to work out.
Right, that's true. And I mean the same for emails now. Emails can just allow people to vent, or there can be really a real exchange. I think the thing about email is there's no voice, and you don't even see the person's handwriting. Something that's very nice about letters is you're not hearing the person's voice, but you see the handwriting, and it brings you a little closer to the writer, I think.
Let's talk a little about publishing books. Now, you've used a small press.
Yes.
Okay, tell me, I mean, how does one get published these days?
Well, I think it's very hard still to get published. Sometimes, many times people have agents, and even with an agent, it can be hard to get a publisher. For my novel on Bittersweet Place, I had an agent, and she was sending it out to publishing companies, and then she wrote me an email that she was leaving publishing completely.
Oh, gosh.
And her agency wasn't taking on any other people, any of her clients. And I got to the publisher Relegation Books, which is a small press, through a publicist who's a friend, Lauren Sarand, and I was talking with her, and she said she knew someone who was looking for manuscripts. Dallas Hudgens, a writer himself, he started the press. So in that sense, it was kind of serendipity. I feel very fortunate that it worked out, because he was a great publisher. But it can be very hard and very discouraging to get a publisher.
Have you ever self-published?
I've never self-published, no.
Okay. Do you think it's legitimate to do that? I mean, a lot of people are doing it.
Yes, I think it's legitimate, and I think the technology makes it much easier now. I think the negative of self-publishing is that it's very hard to promote a book, and also bookstores may not carry your book. You know, you can sell the book on Amazon, but if the books aren't in bookstores, they're not really visible. And so that's a downside. On the other hand, some people don't want to spend years of their life trying to get an agent and then trying to find a publisher. It can be a very long process. For some people, it happens really quickly, but for many people, it's a very long, circuitous process.
Now, if you self-publish, I mean, on Amazon or wherever you put your books, how do you get compensated, or do you?
Well, I haven't done it on Amazon, but I have friends who do, and I think there's some arrangement that for every book sold, the author gets a certain percentage, which is the royalty.
Okay.
Because many people publish through Amazon and Creative Space.
Okay.
I think that's what it's called. So they have to pay to do that.
Okay.
But then every time a book is sold, there is...
It gets something.
It gets something.
So it's changed the whole paradigm, where a publisher would give you an advance, and then
Right.
you would write the book, and I guess then there's a royalty situation, but you've gotten something, at least up front.
Right. With a publisher, even a small press, you often get.
In the minute we have left, tell me what
Okay.
you're working on.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I'm working on more short stories, and I'm also working on another novel. And it's a novel that's a little different from on Bittersweet Place. It's about a lawyer, and it's about an insanity case. And it has a trial in it, and it's really about the law.
Okay, and what inspired you to do that?
It's
Scott Thoreau?
No, I'm a lawyer as well, and I was a public defender, and so it's kind of based on that experience. Just, I was inspired by that experience.
Well, I look forward to reading it,
Thank
and perhaps
you.
we'll talk again.
Thank you. Well, this is wonderful. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much. It's mutual.
Thank you.
Ronna, good luck with your new books.
Thank you.
And we'll talk again soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town in Village 2. We'll see you next time.